very much for tuning in today. Today I'll be speaking to Atiq Malik, who is a criminal lawyer and who is involved centrally in the current barrister strike that's taking place right now. Atiq's just going to speak to us a little bit about what's going on, why the barristers are striking, and what we can do to support their movement. So Atiq, thanks for coming on today.
No worries.
Could you just start off by telling us a little bit about sort of what the barrister strike is about and what they're striking for?
So the strike that's taking place is all to do with the current position with legal aid and the funding of legal aid work for lawyers to do such work in the criminal arena. And the reason it's arisen is quite simply this: access to justice is a fundamental part of any civilized society. And if a person is charged with a crime, then in order for them to have any chance of having justice, they need to have equality of arms. So if, for example, you got dragged into court for something, if the other side had lawyers and you didn't, then that would not be fair, would it? It wouldn't be right, because there's no equality of arms there. If the other side had experienced, very skilled lawyers and you had a lawyer who wasn't as skilled and wasn't equipped in the same way, that wouldn't be fair. And it's a human right, that the right to a fair trial is a human right. And so equality of arms, access to justice, these are all principles that underpin that human right of the right to a fair trial. How does that tie into legal aid? The current average age of a criminal solicitor, a criminal lawyer, is now in his 40s and above. If you go to any law school across the country, every single law school is telling its students, every single bar school is telling its students, stay away from criminal law, because you cannot make a living from it. It's getting that bad. The rates at which criminal solicitors and barristers have been paid are the same rates they were paid at effectively 20 years ago. Not only has there been no increase, there's been a decrease. You've got a situation where junior barristers are working below the national minimum wage, believe it or not. Lawyers are being paid the equivalent of £50 to go to court to do a hearing. And it might take all day to do the hearing because of the court backlog and the rest of it. And then they have expenses on top of that from getting there and back. And in effect, they actually walk away with a negative, As solicitors, we might be representing a vulnerable person with mental health issues at the police station, at the magistrate's court, and then at the Crown Court, to make sure that they get the right decision and they get the right support that they need going forward from the criminal justice system, not just throw them in prison and throw away the key. As a firm, that could easily take 15 to 20 hours of work, and for that, the solicitors' firms are being paid in the region of about £400. It's just unsustainable. The whole system is collapsing. In the last 4 years, 400 law firms across the country have disappeared. We have now got 1/3 less law firms in the country representing vulnerable people. And the situation is getting worse because as the current generation of criminal lawyers, whether it's barristers, solicitors, are coming to an end of their career, there's no fresh blood coming in. So how can you be a first world country and not even afford access to justice for your own citizens? And that is the path that we're on. The whole system is broken, it's crumbling, and if it's not fixed, it's not the lawyers that will suffer in the end. It's the hardworking citizens of this country, because the rich don't care. The rich don't care about legal aid, because if they want a lawyer, they'll just pay for it. Who uses legal aid? That's the question. It's like the NHS. Who uses the NHS? If the NHS is broken or taken away, it's the hardworking citizen of this country that will suffer. Same with the law. And sometimes you hear people saying, oh, well, we've got no sympathy for criminals, but hold on a second. You could be wrongly accused. Actually, let's go beyond that. If we are talking about activists here, we've seen the onslaught by the establishment on protesters and activists. How lawyers who support activist movements are referred to as lefty activist lawyers, and all sorts of derogatory terms used against them. How the power of judicial review is being scrutinized and attempts to be made to take it away from the courts because government doesn't like to be criticized. But for any of this to happen, any case to go through the system, someone has to instruct a lawyer. Now, if there's no legal aid or no lawyers around to do it under legal aid, how will the activists or the oppressed people of this country get justice when they are persecuted? This is the really scary question which nobody is talking about. That one of the backbones of society to get justice is the law. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, because I agree, sometimes it's very, very difficult. We personally take on all sorts of cases, and winning or losing obviously is part of the formula, but it's not the end part of the formula, because sometimes getting that discussion going of oppression and prejudice is also important, because the court of public opinion is important. But if you can't even get into court to openly have those discussions and expose the cracks in the system, what are we left with? And it's that whole picture of taking away people's rights and ability to fight for their rights, which I find really scary.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's also interesting kind of how I feel this kind of seals in a bit of a dynamic where the only people who are able to go into law as a profession become people who are able to deal with these long periods of training and low income, and then to go into corporate law, for example, where you are representing rich and powerful people, and that normal people who want to go in and kind of represent vulnerable people and working class communities are kind of frozen out of the field. I was wondering what you think of as your sort of experience as a person trying to represent vulnerable people and activists and working class communities in law. How that has been. Has it been difficult? Has it been?
It's been extremely difficult. It's been extremely difficult to the extent that myself and my firm, a lot of the work that we do to try and help people who are vulnerable and affected by the establishment, it's got to a stage where we don't even expect payment for it, because getting payment from legal aid is almost impossible, or it's very little. And obviously the people that we represent don't have the money to pay for it. And so a lot of the work that we do is done on goodwill. And it's extremely difficult, because to effectively, when you fight the establishment, for example, they'll have a whole team of barristers, a whole team of solicitors, a whole team of experts doing all sorts of reports. And for us to be on equal footing and step into the battlefield with them, it's extremely difficult, because we are relying on goodwill. And to get goodwill, only certain types of cases will generate enough interest for professionals to step forward and do it on goodwill. And so the problem with that is that there may be hundreds and hundreds of cases out there of people needing help, but only a small proportion of them might see the spotlight in some shape or form because the case is important enough. But the reality is every case is important. Everyone's life is important. Every right that is interfered with is important. But the reality, the system in this country now, is that there are many, many people out there suffering injustices and are voiceless. There is nobody there to speak for them. There is no funding for it. And many of us, we've scratched our heads of how do we, get around this? Do we create some sort of a justice fund? How is it managed? And all sorts of brilliant organizations out there have done and are doing good work as well. But there's so much injustice out there without proper funding. It's unsustainable. I would love to dedicate my whole firm to just helping people with their, any interference with their rights. But it's not possible because there's no funding. There's no real funding for it, And I think this is why this battle for legal aid is so fundamental, because it's only by having that secured, that sustainability secured, that we can then have some semblance of a fight left in us going forward to fight for the rights of the people affected in this country.
So can we move on to talk a little bit about sort of the actual strike in itself? So what you're saying is these barristers, junior barristers, are out striking for an increase in legal aid. what exactly are they demanding? And can you tell me a little bit sort of about the process of the strike and how long are they striking for and things like that?
So, in effect, what they're demanding is a revamp of the current system, so that the pay that they receive is a reflection of the current state of affairs in this country in terms of the increase in cost of living, the increase in salaries generally across the board. There's been no increase in fees for lawyers working in legal aid for almost 2 decades. In fact, they have been cut. So what is being asked for is a reversal of the cuts, first of all, and then an increase to reflect today's wage effectively. And also, there's lots of pockets of work that are done on goodwill, which are not paid for at all. And so for all of that to be filled and some sort of remuneration given for all of that work, because if not, the situation we're in now is also this. At the moment, and this is going to get worse, the only people you see doing legal aid work are generally going to be those who can afford to do it. And they tend to be from a certain background, okay, in terms of race, in terms of class, etc. But people from various communities would rather see someone from their own community, someone who can relate to them, someone who understands the struggles they're going through, someone who can talk to them. When Grenfell happened and the inquiry was set up, one of the biggest uproars that took place initially was that the lawyers that had been chosen for the inquiry were not reflective of the community that was affected. And it's important because if the lawyer is going to be the voice for the affected community, they need to understand the community. They can't just sit there and think of themselves as better than everybody, and not really be from the same communities as them. And then that takes us into the world of global majority ethnic professionals, global majority ethnic people, because we are affected in the same as everybody else and in a different way too. And sometimes our story may not be explained as easily to somebody who doesn't understand us or is not from our community. And equally, it may not be fought in the same way unless it's somebody who is from our community and is from the same background as us. And to take that choice away from us and for us, our people, to be left with simply, middle class or higher people who do it and because they enjoy it and are not really have the empathy with us that we have because they haven't been through the same struggles as us. That's also a key point of all of this too, because all of those prospective legal aid applicants and lawyers that could be doing that work from our communities will also be sidelined because they can't afford to do it.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I feel like that's the thing where this kind of image of the law profession is being kind of dominated by white middle class or upper class people. So
males as
yeah,
well. Yeah,
a lot of people.
Because think about it: if you're a woman working in the criminal justice system, and we've already got this standard of pay which is unsustainable, and that's for a person working full time. What happens to the female who wants to start a family, has to take time out, and then has to try and get back in again? It's impossible. What's going to happen is that the only people who will be able to effectively work as legal aid lawyers will be the white middle class males, and that's discrimination in itself.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it's interesting that, and we see how these problems that are kind of happening across the kind of workforce and across the working class at the moment is kind of also also affecting what's happening in law.
Yeah, it's synonymous. Yeah, it's the same issues everywhere, and the reason for that is it's the same person to blame everywhere. It's the establishment, and the establishment know that. Personally, I think there's a deliberate process here of decoupling and disabling the NHS, decoupling and disabling legal aid. All of these valuable. Sorry, I'm still there. Yeah, all of these valuable processes and systems that we have in this country that are so integral for the working class of this country are being taken away. you know, because it doesn't matter to the rich, it doesn't matter to the establishment, because, you know, these things, you know, NHS, they've got their private lawyers, haven't they? Law, they've got their private lawyers. They don't need legal aid.
I was basically just wondering, kind of, given that interestingly this is happening at around the same time as the rail strikes, and as teachers and nurses and lots of people across the country are talking about going out on strike, what you think the sort of potential is for kind of bringing these kind of struggles together, and for kind of, in a way, unifying the barrister strike with what's happening in other sectors?
I think, to be honest with you, the barristers and the solicitors, all the lawyers need to wake up to this. That they need to work in unification with all of the other actions that are taking place. Because in silo, you're only going to get so far. And I think that's an important point. It's something that I will be pushing myself for them to do that. The problem is with barristers and solicitors, being involved in strike action as an industry has always been alien. Part of the reason for that is that the regulations that govern solicitors and barristers actually make it illegal for legal aid solicitors to go on strike. And it also makes it illegal for the barristers too. And then that is a form of fear-mongering that is used to stop lawyers from engaging in it, because as upholders of the law, people are supposed to be following the law, advising others. It's a very difficult situation for them to break the law effectively, and it's quite scary that the government's got away with this for so long, but they've actually managed for decades to instill these rules in the lawyers of this country that if they were to go on strike, particularly legal aid lawyers, they would be in breach of their regulatory requirements. It's just shocking. There's no other industry works like that, as far as I know.
So what is that law? Where did that come from? And so what's the rationale behind it?
I'll have to double check it. I think it comes from the regulatory requirements of the SRA, and or it comes from the legal aid contract, because with legal aid lawyers, they have to work under a legal aid contract. I have to refresh my memory where exactly it comes from. It's from one of the two. But effectively, what it means is if you're a legal aid lawyer, you cannot go on strike. And if you do, you're in breach of your legal aid contract at the very least. If not, you may also be in breach of the regulatory requirements. So, because there's all sorts of rules in place of, if a client's instructed you, for example, that they're going to court on a certain day, you are duty bound to attend. And if the client hasn't given you permission not to attend, and the client has to attend a court of law on their own, then there's potentially a legal aid breach there, if it's under legal aid, and or regulatory breach, where you haven't safeguarded the interests of your client. Because the way the regulatory scheme for lawyers is drafted, everything is centered around the client, and the client has to come first. So if a client has asked you to attend court, you've agreed to attend court, you've instructed by them, and then you decide for your personal reasons not to attend, then there's a regulatory issue there for which you can be sanctioned and even lose your practicing license for. And then similarly with legal aid, there's all sorts of requirements under the legal aid contract with the Ministry of Justice. And if you breach that, they can take your contract away, which means you lost your living.
So how are the barristers currently getting around that?
They're not. This is why the Lord Chancellor has said that barristers engaging in this will be reprimanded. Yeah. This is why Dominic Raab yesterday has asked all the court staff to collate a list of every single barrister engaged in the action. And so this is all scaremongering to suggest that anyone who's engaged in it is in breach of their professional rules and responsibilities, and that they will be sanctioned and potentially could lose their license to practice. This is what's happening in the background. Yeah, and it only happens in our industry. If I was, for example, any other industry, you've got a right to protest, haven't you? It's a human right. But in law, for the lawyers, it's been curtailed. It's been curtailed for many years. It's effectively, you are not allowed to exercise your human right to protest. And personally, I think, this is my opinion, if barristers and or solicitors are sanctioned for this, I think somebody should bring an action against whichever entity is doing the sanction, whether it's the Bar Standards Board or the Solicitor Regulatory Authority or the courts, for a breach under the Human Rights Act, for this to be examined. I mean, is it fair that you've taken away the right to protest
I was just wondering, moving on, sort of going off that, what do you think that we should be doing now to support the barristers? What can the movement do to support them?
I think the core of public opinion is where the battle really is, isn't it? If the public understand the issues here, if the public are with the lawyers and everybody else in this country who is striking for very good reasons, then that's the only way we can put pressure on the establishment. And so to support them, getting this valuable information out there to everybody, whether it's by podcasts or social media actions, etc., is very, very important. If there are mass protests happening, I think the barristers and lawyers and solicitors should be involved in that and working in collaboration with all the other movements. And I think the time for that has come. I think to be honest with you, I think our profession needs to wake up and realize that they need to be working in collaboration with all the other movements in order to, obtain any sort of justice for themselves and others. And I think the collaborative working moving forward is the key here. And maybe the other movements need to reach out to the barristers and vice versa, and the solicitors as well, because there's two different entities in this country. You have barristers and you have solicitors. Both are funded by legal aid. They both perform different functions, but for the same end goal. And so both professions, the solicitors and the barristers, need to wake up. They both need to come together. They both need to work in solidarity with each other and with the other movements that are happening out there for workers' rights, etc.
Nice one. Thanks very much, Atiq. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, just say thank you very much for giving us this opportunity and having me on board.
Great. Thanks very much for coming on today, Atiq. Finally, I just wanted to say, if you guys agree with what Atiq said, you found it interesting, please do go out to the picket lines for the Barristers Strike and support them. Please also do consider joining Counterfire. We are central to building lots of these movements of striking workers, of anti-austerity movements, anti-racist movements, and anti-war movements. And it's important that we have socialist organizations with strong principles who are able to kind of build these movements and give them political direction. So if you agreed with what Atiq said, please consider joining Counterfire. So Atiq, thanks very much.
Thank you. See you back.